Third-party software for your business team can be fantastic, solve a bunch of problems, but sometimes you'll find after a little while it doesn't quite live up to your expectations in a way that it's kind of leaving gaps. And that those gaps lead to, ironically, the software is supposed to help you kind of accidentally handicapping you. So today we're going to talk about this here, which is weaving in new logic that's going to prevent the user from a harmful action. So we're trying to replace the gap that's there in the software with something else. So there's always a couple of opportunities to do this. I mean, the typical way a business handles this is to say, hey, we found this problem in our process. What can we do about it? We can either cross our fingers and hope that everybody remembers the best practice, or we can create a wiki page, or we can create a printout of best practices and put them up on a wall somewhere, and have to retrain everybody new that's coming in to make sure they don't make the same mistake that way. Or we can do what I'm suggesting here, which is let's make it very hard for the software or for the worker to fall into this gap as part of their daily process. So how do we do that? We're going to do it again with the user script. So let's take a look. I'm going to show you like 5 examples, and in each of them we have a scenario. We have the behavior that the software comes with, and then there's what we'd like to have happen. Why? Because we want to avoid this painful gap. So the gap can affect anybody from the employee, it could impact the business, or arguably the worst, it can impact your customer. If it impacts the user, it's not his fault. The worker really uh, is doing their duty. And in the case of the business, sometimes you could be adding extra unnecessary costs and errors and expense because of this problem. And if it's the case of the customer, you could be costing that customer time or money. So that's what we're going to try to do, is to attack this directly inside of the software, make an adjustment there so that this problem doesn't happen. So let's look at the first scenario we've got, which is basically here we are inside of a EMR software, a medical record software used by, or sometimes they call health record software used inside of medical practices. And the one example we have here is we're going to talk about churn. So typically what's supposed to happen is you make an appointment with the doctor, and then as preparation for that day's routine, what's supposed to go on is that 2 days in advance, you call the patients, make sure that they're all coming in. After that, you may need to print necessary forms needed for that day's patients. But what should not happen is the reverse. The reverse would be, let's go ahead several days ahead of time, print out all the forms before we've even confirmed that the patients are coming. And we typically can do that. And then afterwards, we'll make all these confirmation calls, and 3 patients will drop out. And that's when we have this concept called churn, where the team is going in circles, doing unnecessary steps for something that didn't need to happen. If they had just done it in the correct sequence, you wouldn't have this problem. So you can teach this to somebody, but you can also quickly remind them in the software. You're going to have to forgive me here because I'm going to be using the alert pop-ups, which are just considered, no bueno in the JavaScript browser world. But you have to realize that in this case, this is utilized everywhere in this particular EMR. And in many ways, we're not trying to stand out as a sore thumb, as something different. We're trying to kind of fit in. So in this case, let's take a look. Here we are at the eligibility and phone list for that day's worth of patients. And ideally, all these patients that you're prepping for the day should have already been called. After you've done that, you kind of come over here and you want to print out their forms that are going to be used for the day. So we'll click on forms, and that will open up a list. There's only one patient here, our test patient, but assume there's 20 there. So the first thing we're going to do is going to want to go ahead and select all the forms to print. But again, the thing we're trying to prevent in this case is the printing of, so let's say you have 25 patients and you have 2 forms for each patient, that's 50 pages, and you're going to collate them and attach them to charts, and maybe these patients haven't even been called yet. So that's not good. So just a little quick reminder to them here, if we go back and we're going to weave in some logic that says, upon the event of clicking on either one of these forms for printing or for all of them for the day, we want a little bit of a reminder, just a brief reminder to make sure that these patients have been called and confirmed first. So that's what happens here. If you go ahead and click on printing, you get this pop-up message that just simply says, please confirm the day's patients before printing the forms or for pulling these charts. Both of those are kind of churn where the office is losing time and money. So there's an annoying little message here that you try to make as nice as possible about, you're maybe wasting ink and paper and your time and your coworkers' time on patients who aren't coming anyway. Please first call these patients to confirm or cancel, and then return to print the day's form. So that's the first example here, where we can do something like this, where we're changing the business logic slightly in there to match what's supposed to happen at the business level rather than what's created inside of the software, which may not fit or may be opening and exposing you to a gap, which may increase the cost. So we can go on to another example here where we have a patient, and in this case, the scenario is oftentimes you'll find out that the patient is no longer returning to your practice. Perhaps they've moved on, perhaps they were not happy, perhaps they left town and aren't coming back, or maybe it was just a simple matter of you no longer offering the same compatibility of insurance policies. So when that happens, what we need to do is mark them inactive. When you do that, the benefit is you take them out of reporting, and you take them out of campaigns, so you don't contact them or bother them anymore. So in this case, the scenario is we have a patient who's becoming inactive, but we want to make sure that besides the person who, anecdotally kind of learned and may pass on the information as to why the patient's no longer coming back, that's valuable information to be preserved for everybody who works in the practice, not only now, but maybe in a couple months. And you shouldn't have to go ahead and, knock on the wall of your neighbor and say, do you know what happened to this person? Do you know what happened to this person? Is this person really not coming back? Why did we mark them inactive? So just provide a little prompt right when you're doing this, kind of similar to the last example, but a little polite prompt to say, hey, listen, before you go ahead and save off this patient now with a new status, would you do me a favor and just put a little explanation in the notes field? So that's what we've got here. We've got the same patient here, Tina test, and we'd like to mark them inactive. There's a nice little notes field. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we made sure, or at least tried to compel the employee who knows the story to capture this and save it before they mark them inactive. So that's what happens here. So if we go back and we go down to the area where we can actually mark this patient inactive, which is here, we can change their status. So we're going to set up just a simple, again, event-oriented, which is going to be triggered upon a click onto the drop-down that changes the status. So as soon as that happens, an event fires off, and we now know that this is kind of important, that we ask the user who's making the status change to go ahead and tell us why and save it off. So here we go. We're going to take the status and change it from active over to inactive. And when you do so, the entire screen scrolls up to the section in question, and you get a nice little alert saying you're marking the patient inactive. Before saving, please type the reasons why the practice is deactivating the patient into the topmost patient notes field. Thank you. So now I'm kind of, I can write in, uh, Tina moved with her family to Georgia on December 1st. And now I can go ahead and hit the save button. And that way, um, with that little polite prompt, we get our practice and our employee and even the patient out of a pickle, because now everyone knows exactly why the patient is marked inactive and may or may not be coming back. Let's go ahead and look at a third example. The third scenario is scheduling, where we have emergency slots in place and normal slots. So I'll show you that in a second here. Okay. So if we're back in the software here and I'm on Tina Test, let's say Tina decided to stay in town. She's not traveling to Georgia anyway. So we want to schedule her for an appointment. She's actually going to come back in December, and we want to schedule that appointment. So all we need to do here, again, this is just the normal software here, but we're going to embellish what happens on the particular page for scheduling the appointment. So you come to this, and let's say we're going to schedule her out for December. We choose a day. Again, this is just the normal software at work. And upon clicking on that, we have a list of the available slots. Well, here's the problem that this bit of business logic we're weaving in is going to help try to solve so that we don't accidentally cause harm. We have an allocation of slots that we regard as emergency slots that we want to reserve. We want to be sure that those are kept, and in the event that that day or very close to it, the day before, there is a patient that calls in who needs to come in, we want to make sure that that slot's available. Well, what could a junior scheduler do that's kind of wrong? Basically, look at the schedule, say, well, all my normal slots are available. This patient really wants to come in that day. I'll just go ahead and click on this one that's the emergency slot, which the business logic for the practices don't ever do. So we want to be able to prompt a user in a similar fashion that this isn't a cool thing to do. So I will show you that first for the case in which it's clearly not an emergency. How do we know that? The scheduler is scheduling them this far out. So you remember I chose a date here, December 8th, and for me, in this time period, that's 6 months forward. So there's no possible way this is an emergency. So if we go ahead and instead of clicking one of these nice slots that are green for any time period, we're going to assume that we just have this slot available for emergencies. And 6 months ahead, if I click on such a slot for scheduling, what should happen is an event fires off upon clicking of this emergency slot, and lets the scheduler know that what they're about to do isn't quite cool. There's two different ways you can handle this. One is with a polite warning, the other is to just simply forbid that it happens. So originally, the idea for this feature was, why don't we just hide those emergency slots and don't show them? But you want to be aware that the software should be flexible, and in the event that some problem really happens like this, where you want to override this business logic, you should be able to. You shouldn't have these slots kind of hidden away or forbidden from being clicked on. So in this case, what you can see is the slot is here for the clicking, and when you do, what we'd like to have happen is that the user script that we're creating for this particular page is going to fire off an event that's going to provide the scheduling employee with an explanation why this may not be such a cool idea to do. So we go ahead and click on the for emergencies only 6 months in advance, and we get this pop-up message here that says the 1220 emergency slot you just checked is being held for a severely ill patient whom the doctor needs to see urgently. We are technically 171 days out, so this patient doesn't fit these harder requirements. If not, big if not, please uh, save and uncheck this high priority slot. Instead, assign this patient to an available regular priority appointment time. After your check, there are only 2 emergency slots remaining for the day. So you want the employee to understand what they're doing is they're taking one that's a coveted slot reserved for a particular class of patient that this patient that we're trying to schedule does not meet those requirements. And also, after doing so, maybe we had 3 such emergency slots, but by taking this one away, we're only going to have 2 available. So you want the person to understand the gravity of kind of doing this step against the best practice of the business. Now, again, we could write this out in a wiki. We could write this out on a piece of paper and hang it on a wall. But the nice, easy way to do it is just to actually weave it into the software and make the polite warning happen in a live manner like we have here. So if I go ahead and instead of this one, I change my mind, say you're right, I shouldn't be using this type of slot. I'm going to assign this person the 1140, which doesn't have such a warning. Um, you can see that the problem goes away, that we don't have it. So the other scenario is very similar. That's the scenario where we aren't months and months out, so we're close by the date, but we want the scheduling person to know how many slots are still available for that day. So I'm going to do that here just the same way. I'm just going to go into another date. In this case, one that's pretty close by. And I'm going to go here, pick a date that's just coming up. And this is a date not too far off, but you really shouldn't be using those emergency slots. You should be using this one, but what happens if I had clicked on the emergency one? I want to get the similar message up on the screen, just letting them know that this patient should fit these harder requirements, and if they don't, please consider using another slot or please consider using another day. So that's what happens here, and it tells you the extent to which this is kind of harming that day for the doctor and for their emergency patients by saying, you're only going to have 2 remaining emergency slots for you to actually do this scheduling. So let's move on now to another scenario we have. And in this one, very, very similar. We're going to schedule the patient for the day, but what could happen is that when you schedule the patient, you configure their insurance. And we have, I would say, 3 different classes of patients. One is a patient who has an insurance policy, let's say Medicare, that takes care of the patient's charges for that day. And then we have patients who are paying cash. Perhaps these patients have no, they're new to us. They don't have an insurance policy. And then there's a third class, which are patients who may have a discount plan. Discount plan is a fixed percentage off, and they're still technically a cash patient, but they're paying on what's called a sliding scale discount. And the problem that I found with this software is that even if your patient does have the sliding fee discount, what goes on is that the software doesn't intelligently pick that discount. Instead, it will always pick the default, which is the cash plan. So the cash plan means that the patient, once they leave, they're going to get a bill for the that appointment's charges in full. And that's not what we want here. So I'll show you that to you right now. I'm going to switch over here. And let's take a look at the same patient. But I'm going to show it to you before the user script does its work and shows you exactly how the shrink wrap software, if you can still call it that, handles it. So we're going to schedule the patient's appointment. We're going to pick a date here. Let's go back to the same exact date. And then, so at that moment, the software attaches to the appointment that insurance for that day. So it's going to pick the default, as I mentioned, and that's down here, which is no insurance self-pay. This is, again, no bueno. We wanted to pick instead the other option that's there in the dropdown, which is this one here. But it's not happening on its own. So that's where the user script comes in. We basically, on this, we sense that we're on the new appointment page, and we want to automatically, in this case, we're not even going to wait for an event to fire. We're going to automatically parse the options. And if we find on that options one of these discount plans that's active, we're going to automatically select it. So let's go back to let's go back here, and I'll do the whole thing for you real quick. We go to schedule, and again, this is with the user script working, and we're going to pick that date again, and we're going to pick a time. And what we want to have happen is, you know, the patient gets the discount automatically configured to the appointment, and that will make sure that when it's billed out, it's all been configured from this exact moment at scheduling time. So let's pick a appointment slot here. Any of them will do. And we scroll down to the same section that has the primary payer listed, which the default's to cash. And instead, we see here that the primary insurance is defaulting to the sliding fee schedule of the discount plan. And this is a good example of protecting the customer from harm. There's actually two types of harm here, in my opinion. The customer otherwise would be getting billed in full. So let's say it's a $100 procedure exam. They get a bill for the $100, and the patient knows that they don't want that, and the business knows they don't want that because they well defined a 30% discount plan. So this patient should get a bill instead of $70. And so this user script change is going to make sure that that happens, because you're going to save at the appointment schedule time what this discount arrangement is for this particular visit. Let us now go and do one more, which is going to work in even more delicate logic that's coming from the business. And in this case, it's from the physician. So the physician wants to make sure that when a patient, here's the scenario, a patient calls in and wants a prescription, or the patient's pharmacy calls in and wants a prescription for that patient. The physician has rules for who should get this, and who maybe is it's dangerous to give any sort of prescription to, and it's just not safe to do so because of the patient's record at the practice. So the doctor's rules are, if the patient has not been seen in several months, then they should not get a prescription necessarily, and we should warn the employee who's actually writing up the prescription that this isn't good. The other piece of business rules that the physician has is that the patient should have a next appointment. We've often found that patients who do not have a next appointment, once they get over the phone a prescription, that becomes their disincentive for coming in and being examined like they need to be. We have patients who are on, even, for example, medications that you really owe it to the patient's health to make sure you're carefully monitoring. So a good example would be hypothyroidism. A patient could get a prescription of levothyroxine for hypothyroidism, but that should be tested periodically. And if the patient hasn't been in a certain number of months, that means that they haven't been retested for their thyroid levels, which means that they probably are not eligible for this until we can take that reading. Maybe their prescription needs to be a smaller dosage. Maybe it needs to be a higher dosage. How are we going to know if we don't remind ourselves that the patient needs to come in for that? So let's take a look at how that works. Here we're going to look at um, a patient here. So this is how it typically looks. So we're here in Bonnie, and she's another test patient, and we need to let's say she called up and wants a prescription to be refilled for her, and what we would need to do normally is we come to this page here for going ahead and creating an order, and um, we don't know the context of the patient at this moment. We don't know when they were last seen. We don't know if they have a new patient. I mean, if they have a new appointment coming up. So what typically has to happen is way too manual, and it should be automated. And it kind of discourages employees from doing the right thing because it's just too expensive to do. So here's what has to happen normally. So you have to ask yourself before I go ahead and create the order, when was the patient last in, and do they have a next appointment? If they weren't in a long time, or they don't even have a next appointment, I shouldn't be giving it to them. I should be doing that first. So normally they would come in to the patient's quick view. They'd have to look them up in another tab, then scroll all the way down to the very bottom and check out their history. And here you can see, wow, the patient doesn't have a next appointment, and they haven't been in the office since 2018. So this person definitely shouldn't be getting it. But you can see this is a bit of work. And then from there, they'd have to go over here and they want to cancel the screen now because they really need instead to be scheduling the patient for appointment. So let's change that with the user script. What the user script is going to do is very similar to what we just did manually, but it's going to do all of it behind the scenes. It's going to go ahead and pull up this quick view page and examine this section at the bottom. More ideally, you'd want to be doing this through some sort of structured data that you could call. But in this case, we can have our software read the last seen appointment and the upcoming appointment, and then do the right thing. So we're going to do that now inside of the same patient, Bonnie. I want to execute this order remotely for a prescription, and I'd love to know from this view, when was the patient last seen and when is the patient's next appointment? So that's what's happening here, where it's doing a lookup behind the scenes and going to give me a nice little two different types of alerts at the very top. One is going to be about their last appointment time, and the second alert is going to be about their next appointment. So here it is. They have two warnings here. You can see they're coded. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the video about temperature gauges, but there is a style to software, and in this case, we're mimicking the style. We're mimicking the alerts. Mild alerts show up in blue. More severe alerts show up in yellow with red text. So here's what we have here. Regarding the last appointment, it's done that lookup and is warning the user who's about ready to create the order that this patient hasn't been seen for a long time, 64 months. So the first thing it says is that's the circumstance, the scenario for this patient. Do not refill. Don't give this patient a refill because they haven't been seen in many, many, many months. And here's the doctor's rules for his business and for best practices clinically is that the doctor really needs to re-examine the patient prior to more prescriptions. So this is his quote directly, which is incorporated into the alert that anybody who has not been seen in 3 months needs to be seen. So the second warning is about the next appointment, which this patient also doesn't fulfill, which is that they don't have a next appointment, and they really are supposed to before they have one. So it's kind of even teaching the junior scheduling people on the phone that this patient has called in, which is wonderful. They've asked for something, which is wonderful. But before that happens, we need them to know that they haven't been seen in too long a period of time for us to prescribe, and also that we need them to have an appointment so that it will be associated with this particular prescription. So in the second patient's case, the patient has been seen recently. In this case, it was a um, uh, very recently, and they do have an upcoming appointment. So if I were to go over here and uh, try to create an order for them, I'm going to see um, those yellow and red alerts instead be kind of nice confirmation that this is a good candidate. So despite the fact that this software renders very slowly, which is not in any way part of the user script, it does the same query and takes a look at the patient's last appointment date and next appointment date and makes sure those are in the correct state. And if they are, the patient is good to go. They would be good candidates for such a order. So in this case, the patient had an appointment within the last 3 months, which is meeting the doctor's criteria. But the issue is, in this case, which is another piece of business logic, that the patient's next visit is coming up very, very soon, in just a few days. And the logic there is, on behalf of the physician, if the patient's coming um, in a few days anyway, we should be handling that the day of. Again, what ends up happening is quite often a patient will feel disincentivized from coming in for their appointment if they get what they wanted anyway, which was this refill. So we would normally, provide the smaller refill of just a few days to tide them over until their actual appointment date. But our experience has been that the patient who gets a full refill cancels their appointment and doesn't come in for their needed checkup, which should be happening in the case of older patients twice a year. So in this case here, we have a nice warning that says, you know what, maybe it's not a good idea. Maybe don't refill this until the appointment where doctor can do this in person because they're going to be coming in 10 clinic days anyway. So please just add a reminder to the chart. So today, we've been looking at 5 examples of scenarios in which the software, the third-party software used by the business, is doing a lot for us, but it's providing gaps that perhaps we can fall into that may impact from a time or cost point of view or in health quality point of view, the patient or the staff or the practice itself. And so the options are to do nothing and just live with it, make those mistakes over and over again, to instead maybe create a best practices guideline sheet that nobody wants to read and maybe nobody ever does. Or the third one is to build this business logic that suits your practice into the software itself. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and make sure that on the fly, as the employees are going through their process, their steps, their pipeline of providing these services, give them a friendly reminder as to what maybe should be happening at this moment, instead of what the software just blanketly allows without this user script aiding the practice. So that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed the presentation here on ways you can create through JavaScript a user script that can be woven into a piece of software that your business uses on a daily, hourly basis, and have its logic actually help out the practice, help out the business and its users